Hello and welcome on the Explore Lab, your demonetized platform at the frontier of knowledge. So today we have Alain Juillet. So that will be the full episode in English. The French translation is in 1 hour and a half. Today I will read you the translation of 4 interviews given by Alain Juillet. All sources will be in the description. Alain Juillet is a former paratrooper. He then joined the SDEC, the French intelligence and counterintelligence agency, in the action department. He then quits to make a successful career in the private sector, but working as an asset for the French intelligence, and is later nominated as chief of the intelligence service of the Directorate General of External Security, formerly known as DEC. He then leads the establishment of a specific economic intelligence service under the Prime Minister. Alain Juillet started to talk about UFOs in 2018, part of a previous documentary with Dominique Filhol. When Dominique declared he was now working on UFOs, Alain mentioned he was quite interested about it. When he participated in Dominique's next he then participated in Dominique's next documentary. Here are his contributions. The fact that it was an American senator who insisted that they have this investigation, shows that it corresponds to a real problem. Nevertheless, the Americans, when they decided to make the request at the request of the senator, did so because there had already been a certain number of problems about which the American pilots, in particular, had, I would say, wondered, the pilots and the birds, what they were seeing when they were seeing it. Periodically, the Air Ministry, the US Pentagon, and the US Armed Forces are interested in unidentified objects because regularly there are alerts that make them wonder. For the military, it's very worrying because when you're military, you need to know what you're looking at. So if you have something that you do not master, you do not understand, then it is obviously logical that we try to understand it. So they launched commissions of inquiry to try to know what could have happened in the cases that have been observed. After the Second World War, many people thought, the Americans thought, that the Russians were behind the unidentified flying objects, saying, well, it's the Russians who found new technologies and used them to spy on us. If it was a country, one of the known countries, the big countries, if you like, the United States, Russia, or China, for as long as there have been incidents, there would have been a leak somewhere that would have said, yeah, that fits the description. However, there have been absolutely no information that has come out on this, confirming or denying that it was the Russians, the Americans, or the Chinese. For me, I don't believe. I think it's something else. From the moment you have a communication campaign by professionals, which effectively explains this kind of thing, the least we can say is that, at the very least, it is an awareness program of the American population. At the very least, it can also be a preparation for a new reality. That is to say that one day we will tell them, well, yes, it exists. And this is how it functions. We will have prepared them for that. Just imagine that we are told, well, listen now, we are sure of ourselves, we have proof that our world is also visited by other worlds, and there are passages between several words that are being made. It will still create a real problem. It will make people think, because it means that we are entering into something else. And the problematic where there are risks that we absolutely do not control anymore. In principle, they are nice, but we don't know anything about them. And in any case, we can't control anything. So this means that we are dealing with something that we cannot control. But you know that human beings, especially today, hate to be in a situation where they do not control the situation. The ones that take it the most seriously today are the scientists, because they say, there is something. Where do they come from? How do they work? That's what is interesting. So, the technology used by these devices is apparently not one that we master, because it is obvious that if we could find a solution that would allow an unidentified device to go from zero to extraordinary speed and to evolve in any way it wants, it is obvious that it would interest everyone because it would change the relationship with fighter aircraft. Among us, after all, if we find something, it can help French defense. So we are still in the same logic of saying, if we find something, it can help us understand the phenomenon, and why not take advantage of it? You have me in a quasi-certainty that in all the cases where we saw something strange, which was perfectly identified, we also saw that there was a phenomenon. We are in front of a device which did not function with the traditional gravitation. We were in anti-gravitation. That, I believe, that it is a quasi-certainty in all the cases of figure. My personal concern is, there are the hermetic and esoteric theories, but they go back to the origin of the world. We find them in ancient civilization. We find them everywhere. And not only in Europe, nor in Egypt, or elsewhere. Everywhere we find the same thing. That is to say that people tell you there are several words in the end that are parallel and that are just next to each other. The word, our word to us, the word that we perceive, us, is not the only word. There are several words that interpenetrate each other. After all, there is also the possibility of it being something that comes out of another word that interpenetrates ours at a given moment and for a very short time. That's perfectly possible. We are on a domain which is very, very complicated, which is rejected by, of course, by the people, the apostle of progress. I would say mathematical and Cartesian. But won't we have surprises in the future? That's another thing. We go next to an interview on A-News security. So that one will be a bit hard to understand because I cut out the part where Alain Juillet was talking, but there were four other people to talk, so it will be a bit axed down. There is a recent interview with a leader in Israel where one of the military officials who was talking about UFOs mentioned the French Committee report as an interesting report. So this confirms what we said. what we have to say at the beginning, taking into account of what we have just explained, is that when we look at the intelligence level, at the level of the search for information, it seems absolutely impossible, unbelievable that since the 40 years that we have quantities of testimonies which accumulate one after the other, and which for a certain number of them, as you said, confirm that it is something that we do not control. It seems incredible, or in any case, very unlikely that a country could have developed this because it would be known. There are no more secrets today. It is not possible to say that it is possible. There are no more secrets today in the world. There are no more secrets. We can hide certain things, but something always comes out. So, a priori, if it was something identified by some, and it was American, Russian, Chinese, or Balochistan, we would know that there is something. And for years, there have been identified events, and we do not find the answer. It's something else, and we are going to talk about it. It's something else. So that's the first point. The second is observation. Since you're talking about the military, and I think we can talk about it in depth, when the military observes that there was finally this type of phenomenon, for example, the films of the US Navy that were shown, where the Navy fighters were sent by radar. So it's not them who saw it, it's the radars that identify the target, that send the fighters automatically to the target, who was locked on the radars of the fighters and their onboard cameras. So it's all that. I mean, there is almost no human intervention, and yet we can see in one of the Navy films, we see crafts that are moving in a way that is mind-boggling compared to the normal functioning of a machine in flight, and even worse, that even enters the water at the same speed and comes out. So we are in a whole series of phenomena which for the military have two aspects. One is to say, could that be potential technologies that could be used to be more effective and to pierce the opposing defenses? And there are examples. The MHD was used by the Russians. We will talk about it later. But for the Russians or the Chinese in particular, it was used to advance in this field. So this is the first aspect. But there are perhaps many other things as well. So the military is asking itself questions, saying that it will be able to use it if it understands how it works. And on the other hand, it is saying to itself that if it comes from elsewhere, is it dangerous? Because the military problem is to secure itself. So why I think we have to insist on this at the beginning is because we have to stop dreaming with movies that tell a bit of nonsense. It is something extremely serious. So we'll see that the more we scratch behind the aspect of interest for the military, the more we scratch and the more we discover things that ask us real questions that are more and more important for a society and a civilization like ours. So it's a whole set. And that's why I thank you that we can work on it thoroughly. So I think it's the first theme. It's the perception of the problem, of the military, of the new operations of UFOs, and the studies that are launched by the military. You mentioned it yourself. You are working on it because I think that even you followed the committee report, if I remember well. You said earlier that indeed there were people who were observing UFOs, But here again, you have to know who is observing. It is true that when it is the local farmer who sees something, and I have all the respect and friendship I can have for them, people doubt it. People doubt, but there are examples, and I think that Jean-Claude or Jean-Pierre Petit can speak about it. There are examples where there are eminent personalities and of high level who saw things, and there it is difficult not to believe in the reality. Finally, I do not know. I think one of the General Mino or others, there is the case of a general who saw, and he was the head of the Air Force of the FATAG, of the armed forces of the Air Force transport. Perhaps you can say a word about that, because it's not a small thing. For a long time, the reports that were made, that were ordered by the states, remain confidential. And for the last 10 years, we have been witnessing the revelation. And that is to say, the publication by the states of these reports, one after the other, all of which pose real problems. This is why we see that, as you mentioned earlier, we have, for example, the Israelis are making statements. We have the Americans launching a new study and investing a lot of money in the end. I believe that the problem is no longer to say there is something that are natural phenomena that we simply do not understand. No. Everyone is now aware that we are facing something that is beyond us. I am talking about the military. I am talking about the defense. Before, there were organizations that made studies, researchers. Mr. Dini mentioned the Sigma Commission that has been working on it for a very long time. There was the GEPAN, who worked on it. Professor Jean-Pierre Petit did a lot of, he reminded us of it, and it is worth the cost to read it. He worked on a lot of things. Behind all that, when you look at the Americans' reports, they have just requested another one. The Navy had just ordered a report on, and it's very interesting because there too, the Navy has just ordered a report on devices which could go underwater at 2,500 miles per hour. That is the last command of the Navy. Well, no craft, whatever it is, today on Earth is able to do that. But here we come to MHD, and with these systems, I think that Professor Jean-Pierre Petit will be able to talk about it better than anyone else. With magnetohydrodynamics, we'll talk about it. He will explain what it is. We can see that there are indeed possibilities by using plasma to replace the medium in which we are. And at that moment, it changes completely all the characteristics. We have an example, and we are going to talk about it with military application, with the Russians torpedo called Skarval, which, if not with plasma, but it is a first step. What is this torpedo? I say it for our listeners because it is interesting. Everyone probably remembers a few years ago the accident of a submarine Kursk, which sank after an explosion on board. It was testing the launch of these famous torpedoes. And the Russians did not want the Westerners to dive on the submarine, on the wreckage of the submarine, to try to save those who were inside, because they did not want anyone to discover what was inside. And the famous torpedoes, what is the characteristic of this torpedo, is that it goes about 4 or 5 times faster than the normal torpedoes we use on our submarines. So everyone understands that when you have a torpedo, when you have something like that, it is the problem of the defense. But how does it work? Well, it projects gas in front of it. And that is to say, it is in the water. Instead of progressing in the water, it progresses in a gas bubble, and therefore it goes much faster. But I hope that I am explaining it properly. But I think Jean-Pierre can talk about it much better than I can because he's one of the fathers of the technique used by the Russians. It is very interesting to have this debate because we are debating with a problem that is very vast on the one hand, and this was mentioned by Jean-Pierre Petit and Jean-Claude Bourret, and on the other hand, we have a cosmological vision that is becoming more and more serious because it must be said that the interventions of eminent personalities are becoming more and more serious. The researchers at Stanford are not morons and idiots. So when they say things, you have to listen to them. And so it's moving forward. And a certain number of analyses have been made, including the one made by Jean-Pierre Petit, who rightly reminds us that we don't know what it is. But I would say that we can be sure. Oh, we say that it's probably there, but what we are sure of is that we cannot say that it is not going forward. It is already fantastic, and it is already a fantastic step forward. 30 or 40 years ago, we could never have said that without being taken we have been considered as dangerous madmen. Today, we say no. There is something behind it. And indeed, when we start to look at what Jean-Claude was doing, when we start to look at religions and others, we realize that there are perhaps things, for example, I will take an example here. We are in philosophy, but it seems to me complementary to the thing. It is what Jean-Claude Bourret was saying, for example, among the Jews, when you are on earth and you do a good deed, it's called a mitzvot, and this good deed is reproduced according to the Jewish text, the Torah and others. It is reproduced in a parallel world. If you are good all your life, well, the good deeds will accumulate and you will have a kind of double who is good or bad according to what you did. If you go to the Hindus with reincarnation, it is the same thing. If you've been good and you have sent in good things and ways, you are to be reincarnated in a brilliant animal or a human being. If you are an awful, you are banned. The notion of the guardian angel in the Christians, the guardian, the good, and the bad angel. There is one in the philosophy for a moment when one says, but it is perhaps a perception, obviously symbolic, perceptions of these famous parallel words. When we talk about this, we must not forget what we can have extraterrestrials who come from other planets or other exoplanets. We can also have parallel worlds that interpenetrate perfectly with ours. And here I come to the second part, which is that for quite a few years now, but for the last 10 years, there has been a fantastic development in quantum physics. Quantum physics allows us to understand, I think, on a scientific level, quantities of things that were totally misunderstood by traditional physics, which means that quantum physics is going to become in 10 years the most important physical method because the Chinese are currently overinvesting in this field. The Americans have started to work on it, and we are beginning to work on it here. All of this means that, once again, it is going to modify, it is going to disrupt our impressions and our ideas. And quantum physics, by no means, is opening up a certain number of doors in relation to what we have just said. In order for people to get hooked in general, you need stages. As was said in the beginning, you can't make people switch from a stage that was completely different to another. For scientists as well as normal individuals, it is necessary to have steps. We must not neglect the evolution of the military because The military, for other needs, certainly, than to know the future, is what we can do there. The military, they are opening a certain number of other doors. I do not say that they make everything. They are in the process of opening a certain number of doors. And by these doors, we all, the politics, everyone, is going to discover that there are things that are totally different from what they have learned and heard since always. It won't take 40 years. It's an acceleration. We are talking. We are talking about the Israeli general who spoke about a station on Mars. Well, when we sent men to the moon in Europa, the night it happened, everybody was in the street to watch. I remember it was so incredible. But there were guys who were up there that we could send up there. Soon we will be on Mars. And as we send human beings elsewhere, we will become aware that people can come from outside to see us. Well, people, beings of any kind, who come to see us, and that is not shocking at all. Before it was unadmonitionable. We were condemned on our planet, but now we can go elsewhere. But after all, why not others? And the problems, the opponents to that, what do they say? They say, no, but you can't do that. There are billions of light years away. How do you want to cross it? Yes, but as said Dr. Jean-Pierre Petit, with another configuration, the very principle of the speed of light does not work anymore. I agree, Jean-Claude, but what interests me is that I see also that it is exciting. It is what today you take Harvard, for example. In the documentary of Filhol, there is the boss of the astronomers of Harvard who had already made declaration by saying, yes, I believe there is something. And there one who is in the top of scientific reflection in this domain, in the department of Harvard, and who says in a book, as you just recalled, that Oumuamua being this kind of long-shaped object of 400 meters, and I believe about 50 meters in height, which passed 2 or 3 years ago, which passed beside the Earth and which did not have any of the traditional characteristics of a meteorite or of something else. It did not enter the mechanic of Kepler. Therefore, there he says, if it's not possible, it is something else. And next, they lead on the possibility we return to the same thing. The only possibility left is something that can be called extraterrestrial. I believe that it is very interesting because when you see scientists like the Americans at Harvard, when you see what Jean-Pierre Petit says in France, when you see what some Russians who have worked on these questions, but in particular Russian mathematicians, say, well, there are more and more great researchers who are beginning to say that they are not the only ones who are interested in this subject. More and more great researchers begin to say, but there is something. Then we start to imagine it by calculations. We start to imagine it by observations. We don't have any proofs yet. And on the other hand, as technical proofs accumulate, because I take up again what Mr. Dini was saying about sigma, we are progressing because between the time when the people watch the film the first time and the time when we saw the film the first time, we are not able to imagine it. The day when people saw the American film that had been classified, We didn't see it for 10 years. And the day when people discovered that fighter jets had filmed, we are no longer at all. We are not saying that it is a meteorological phenomenon or something. We are in something else. In any case, there is effectively in the ancient text, it is said at the time, and the gods came to teach the humans. And one tells, it is by the woman. There is a very interesting text on this subject. It's the story of the Atlanteans, in definitive. So there are many things on this subject, but the base of religions is a whole symbolic part which is inspired of things, of facts which happened. They were transformed in the imaginations of the ones and the others, but rested on basis. It is proved. It is the history of the world. There is a certain number of things we know with the flood. We know with all that. We know that it corresponds to a certain period. But I believe that we all agree to say that in the end, we started from a time when we did not believe in anything at all. On that side, it was not serious, it was not possible. The evolution makes that today we made a part of the way we are conscious that we awareness, and Jean-Pierre Petit reminded us of this, the awareness of scientists, of the contribution of quantum physics, and of the modification that it introduces in all our physical and mathematical reasoning, because it changes a lot of things, means that we are still, through this, still progressing. And on the other hand, the reflection on the other part, in the case of cosmology, also evolves and become more and more dense. If 20 years ago we just mentioned the exoplanets, as Luc Dini said, we would have been locked up as crazy. We are thus discovering that there are many things that we didn't know, that we didn't understand, but that are beginning to open up fantastic horizons. So that's why today we can, I think, make a show like this one. 20 years ago, we would have wanted to do this. We would have been locked up when we left the studio. Well, today, my friends, we can see that everyone is beginning to understand. If we go in the direction of, for example, Jean-Pierre Petit saying that the problem is contact, effectively, the day when there will be contact, the day when we will be able to identify contacts in one form or another, well, obviously, that will change things. But who will have the contacts? The privileged, the powerful, in one form or another, and the means to have it? Then at that moment, and we won't know it because it takes time for that. It takes time. The revelation takes time. In this case, you want to react. The Comita report was made within the framework of the commissions of the IHEDN. It is very serious, and the IHEDN, it is not only the military, it is a mix of researchers, of high civil servants, and thus there is a whole set of very varied people, but all of very good level. And that was at time, it was a true shock because they published this report, which was on precisely the UFOs at a time where it was considered as far-fetched by the majority of people. And that an institute like the IHEDN, the Institute of High Studies of National Defense, made such a report created a shock to such an extent that it was presented to the minister, who listened, of course, with a lot of interest. But behind it, as always, as it shocked a lot of people. It was evoked by practically all of us here. It is what it was really opposite. To speak about it was really to devalue oneself. For the military, a fighter pilot was ridiculed. He dreams awake. So there was a kind of lead cover that fell on this report, even though it was official. And as a result, it is still available, but practically few people, apart from professionals and specialists, have spoken about it. And it is a great pity because it is a report that has been read all over the world, because it is one of the rare times where when the French have produced something that had the label of the Ministry of Defense, because it was produced by the IHEDN, but also depended on the Prime Ministry. What we have to be cautious about, and that's the whole problem, is that each one sees no one's way in the end. When you look at those who do the studies on the field today, unquestionably well, you can agree that, or not agree, but they try to record facts. So, well, it's productive, it's not productive, it goes far enough. After all, each one of us can judge the efficiency. It's one thing. But there is a will to try to understand. There are scientific aspects, if we go back to what we said at the beginning. To try to understand, we can dress it up as we want, but there is a will to understand. There are scientific aspects. Jean-Pierre Petit was at the heart of its conception, and one of the settings of the full development of the MHD. It is indisputable that the MHD, the information was published, the findings were published, but the Russians applied it, including now in the hypersonic missiles. The hypersonic missiles are derived from the MHD. The Chinese use it, but we know that the Chinese spy on everyone to try to catch up. So it's obvious that they are interested in the work that was done in France, but they are also interested in the work that was done in Russia. The Americans passed by at first. They had not seen visibly, they had not understood all that they could draw from it. But when they discovered, then that it is always the same. A new wave inside the military uh, of interest when they discovered what they can do with MHG and what the Russians were in the process of making. With these techniques and this science, the Russians were able to make military machines, and the others could not stop them, obviously. Then, obviously, America started immediately by overinvesting to make the same thing, and for good reason, because there we are in the history of the sword against the armor. It is clear. The problem, indeed, as Jean-Pierre Petit says, that he had not at all imagined this to make military weapons. But I know it because we speak about it. For example, the General Norlin, who was even the chief of staff of the President of the Republic, who was the boss of the Air Forces, who was at the IHEDN, and who worked in the Cometa report. He was so touched by all that at the end, he became the first of the anti-nuclear ones in France, the boss of a very important anti-nuclear club. If you want, we see all these implications because when you choose a certain number of things, you realize it is similar to the reactions toward the nuclear by the Americans. Oppenheimer and the others who invented the atomic bomb, when they saw what they had invented, were taken of panic because they said the consequences are terrible. We play with things that are beyond us. To come back to the MHD, If you want to say that, yes, it was a find, a discovery, and that was perfected. But it is true that in France, and this is the characteristic of this history, it has been completely put aside, and we have not seen the development of the use of the MHD, not only at the military level, but in other domains. Without it, it is very clear that the Russians have taken an indisputable lead. But I am sorry, I am going to compound something we tried first time to do some beautiful things, because we have not understood the MHG. We did not understood the internet either. We must not forget that the creator of the internet, a Frenchman called Louis Pouzin, who is an engineer, invented the internet. We weren't able to keep it at home, and the internet left to the United States. One sees what it became today. That's the Queen of England who decorated Pouzin of the Order of the British Empire, so that one recognizes that that he was the founder of the internet. I would say that, first of all, I am very happy that we were able to make this program with all of us and the richness of this exchange. Well, I hope that all the listeners who listen to the program will live with the conviction that it is something very serious and that we cannot miss what is happening in this field. That is to say that we are living in a world where we have to take care of our own needs. We are probably very close to a moment where these researches are going to mix. I would say, on the one hand, the technical level, on what happens on Earth, like Japan or others, and on the other hand, the deep reflections. On the fact that more and more there is an evidence that there is something there that can be civilizations of the worlds, parallel worlds, exoplanets, we do not know, but there is something anyway. Each one can interpret it, but there is something that happens and we cannot deny it. And from the moment we cannot deny it, it is necessary to be seriously interested. And unfortunately, it is necessary to say that it is not possible to deny it. Unfortunately, we must also say that in 80% of the cases, it is romanticized. We tell stories. And that from there it takes away the credibility of something that is more and more credible. And I would even say that is now certain. We are going towards an interview given June 3rd on Radio Canada on the program Bien Entendu. For a very long time, these phenomena were controlled by the Air Force because they were the ones who were concerned, in the end, with the unidentified flying objects that concerned the air defense. And for a very long time, that was either perceived as misunderstood meteorological phenomena or as something potentially sent by an enemy. And therefore, at that time, that represented a real danger, and that had to be identified, and that had to be treated by the air means. So we were not all in a logic which appears more and more lately, and which should appear even more if I believe what is said in the report which is going to be published by the American Congress. What has put the bug in everyone's ear is that as long as there were only testimonies of people who had seen something go by, we could always try to interpret it. But from the moment we have, for example, what happened to the Navy, the biggest American aircraft carrier that identifies something on its radar that scrambles its planes. These planes arrive on the target is identified on the onboard radars, and the onboard radars of the planes lock on the target. It's not the pilots, but the radars themselves that automate themselves on the target and record what is happening. And we see, in particular, in one of the things that have been shot, we see a target that goes from 0 to more than 6,000 miles per hour in a tenth of a second, which is rigorously impossible for human machines. That is clear. We see another one which enters the water at the same speed, it continues to go as fast underwater, and it comes out again. We do not know how to do it. So obviously, we are in front of something that we do not master. So of course, you're always tempted to say, these are our enemies. For the Americans, the Russians, or the Chinese, who are doing bad things. And the others say the same. The Russians and the Chinese say that it must be Americans. But the problem is, and it is a man of the intelligence service who tells you this, in reality, there is no secret that does not come out after a few years today. So if there was really a country that had found extraordinary things, absolutely defying all the laws of physics, then we would have remorse. We would have some elements, but we have nothing. So indeed, what the boss of the American National Intelligence has just said, we are in front of something that we do not understand. And the question that arises is it something that is homegrown? Did we make it? And this does not seem possible, for the reasons that I have just explained. Is it something else? It seems absolutely crazy, unbelievable, but I think that when the American Congress, the report will probably, and I say probably because we don't know what will be said, it is being discussed a lot in the United States at the moment. There will be elements that will appear that will start to show that there is something that escapes us, on which we must start to question ourselves. When we see displacements in the air and in all the space, in all the mediums, as well as in the water, at absolutely incredible speeds, when we see that it happens in addition by living in all directions, therefore that defies the laws of gravity, that defies all. Therefore, in front of that, even the most advanced researchers on the military level, as the hypersonic missiles and others, we are unable to do things like that. For a very long time, pilots, like everyone else, like most people, nobody wanted to talk about this kind of phenomenon because it worried everyone. A pilot who is checked every year on his mental and technical abilities and so on, to be able to keep his flight license. If he comes in and says, I have seen UFOs or unidentified craft, he says to himself, I'm going to lose my license. They are going to think I'm crazy. So no one was talking. And in the end, the language has only been freed for a short time. Recently, there were television programs in the United States organized by Luis Elizondo, a former CIA officer, in which he interviewed many American pilots. And then we learned that indeed pilots have seen these devices during the Korean War and during the Indochina War. That they have seen them again recently, that airline pilots have seen them. And the testimony that I found very interesting a few weeks ago, released in the United States. It is an interview with a woman fighter pilot and a man fighter pilot who were sent by the Nimitz to follow the UFOs and who say, we saw them. It's incredible. And who are serious people. An Air Force commander is not a child. If a woman Air Force commander tells you that, a priori, you have to believe her. She's not crazy. When you're faced with something you don't understand, there's always a tendency to deny it. And one of the ways to deny it is to ridicule it. When you said, I've seen weird things, and so on, automatically people would say, "Ha, that's it. He's seeing little green men from somewhere else," and so on. So we ridicule him, and this avoids looking at the problem on the bottom in depth. Then, when we are people, professionals, factual people who are there to reflect on facts, then we look at this kind of things, then we say that, wait, there is a problem here. There are a lot of cases that have been elucidated because it can be a cloud, a weather balloon, it can happen, but it is identified. It is not the same thing at all. But those that we could not identify, the habit was in all the countries of the world to classify the file and to classify it as unknown, incomprehensible, ununderstandable thing. We kept it aside. The problem is that we have progressively realized in recent times that all these phenomena that had been identified by some and others and not taken seriously were practically all similar and corresponded to something that has quite similar characteristics. So, this is where, if you like, we are obliged to ask ourselves question now. I don't have the answer, let's be clear. No more than the others. But we try to understand, and we try to understand by going as far as possible, because behind, if we take the purely military plan, something that penetrates our space, we don't know if it's a friend of or an enemy. If it has sympathetic intentions or it has bad intentions. So it is very important to try to understand what it is and to try to understand and detect its behaviors. Is it aggressive or is it rather nice? Because this is a national security issue for all major countries and others. I have noticed that the Americans have been increasing the pressure for a few years. There are studies and announcements, and each time it goes a little further. We can wonder if they are not preparing a kind of revelation, which is to say to us, but wait, we thought we were unique, but maybe there is something else. Which is obviously colossal, a complete upheaval at the level of humanity. To think that there is something else, that is a challenge to say the least. What is certain is that they are increasing in power, and we don't see very well. If it was to say at the end there is nothing, we don't see why they would increase in power like that for the last 3 years. And on the other hand, the things that they let leak, because they let them leak, because they were classified at the beginning, and they released them. I might as well tell you that if they got out, it is because there was a green light, of course, from the DoD. And if they got out, it's to prepare us for something. Because it's true that people shouldn't, the viewers, the listeners, the Canadians, the French, should not wonder and panic. We have to tell them, don't worry. There is something. We are looking for it. We are watching. We are trying to understand it. It doesn't seem aggressive, but there is something else. We will find it. Because we will know one day. We will find it. And now the last interview, it was the most recent on the channel Not Happy. That's the name of the channel. Someone who makes excellent documentaries called Dominique Filhol came to see me to film the Alstom affair, when there was the Alstom scandal. He wanted to know what I thought about it, as I knew the file well, very well. We discussed the subject. He recorded me. And then, at the end, he said to me, well, I'm leaving you because tomorrow I'm launching a new filming. I said to him, oh, yes, which one? He replies, the UFOs. I said to him, "Well, that's an interesting subject." He asked, "Are you interested?" I answered, uh, "I have a real problem when I see that unidentified devices, objects, it can be devices, UFOs, it happens. We know that there are some, and we know it's better and better because now we have had films, in particular, the Americans have managed to film and to take measurements in all areas. We have a lot of things, a lot of information that has been collected for 15 to 20 years. And we can see that it is something that we do not understand, that we do not control. For example, I give a very simple example, but they are at a standstill. And suddenly, in a tenth of a second, in 1 second, they are at 10,000 kilometers per hour. Well, we are not able to build something that does that. I will explain why. It is not possible. It is because we do not know today how to make a material that does not melt when passing through the air at such speed. But I'm not talking about the helicopter that we took for UFO at night. I'm not talking about all of that. We know that there are people, and in particular in France with Japan, who study that and who find the answers. But there is a part. The Americans have confirmed it. Avril Haines, the boss of the American intelligence, recently said it is a domain where there are things that we do not understand. We are looking for, and as long as we don't understand, we must not talk about it too much. Because it bothers everyone, and it is scary, and yes, it is scary because they have never been offensive until now. There has never been any. But imagine that a device like that becomes offensive, becomes aggressive. Anything that can happen, because if anything can happen because we don't know how to stop it. And then you are right to say that if it was a drone, because we have not thought about it, it is it not a drone? Have the Chinese not found a trick? Have the Americans or the Russians not found a trick? But when we look at it, we see that the Russians, the Chinese, the Americans, everyone is trying to understand. But everywhere there are services that are trying to find out what it is. So it is a real question. I'm not talking about little green men. That's not my subject at all. My subject is to say that we are facing something we do not understand. And it would be nice if we could understand it, because it could become a real danger. That's all. And that's what interests me, is to try to understand what it is, and then get worse if you want. My questioning goes even further because we saw it in the air, that's clear, but we also spotted some in the water, and that go very, very, very fast at very, very high speeds. We don't know what it is that goes at speeds much greater than the sound barrier, much greater. And there too, we say to ourselves, well, that's strange. What could it be? So if you let it be that, there is a whole set of things. And the more we advance in the techniques, the more we identify events of this kind. But on the other hand, until now, we haven't been able to explain them. The real question is, we are going to find it. I'm convinced that we will find it, but it takes a little time. Thank you, everyone, and see you at the next episode.